A millionaire agreed to an arranged marriage, but was shocked when he saw his bride. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into the story. I'm sure you're curious about what happened next, so let's continue the story. Richard walked behind Melanie into the house, his mind still racing. He couldn't stop thinking about how different she looked from the cold businesswoman he had imagined. Melanie was warm, easy to talk to, and there was something about her that made Richard question everything he had believed about relationships and marriage. As they walked through the grand foyer of her family's mansion, Richard couldn't help but feel like he was stepping into a world far removed from his own. The marble floors, the elegant decor, it was also grand asterisk, nothing like the sleek modern apartments he was used to. Melanie led him into a sitting room, offering him a seat. She seemed calm and collected, as though this was just another business meeting. Yet there was a nervous energy in her eyes that Richard couldn't ignore. She sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "I know this is a bit strange," Melanie said, breaking the silence. "I wasn't expecting it to be like this either." Richard couldn't help but smile at her honesty. "Yeah," he replied. "I think we're both in over our heads here." He leaned back in his chair, trying to maintain his usual confident posture, but a small part of him was feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Nervous. "So, what happens now?" he asked. Melanie hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words. "We take things slowly," she said. "I think we both know this isn't about love or romance, but maybe we can make it work. We don't have to rush into anything." Richard nodded, agreeing with her logic. He had signed the contract. This was just a deal after all. But there was a small voice in his head telling him it wasn't going to be as simple as that. As they discussed the details of their arrangement, living in the same house, attending events together, and making appearances as a couple, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that he was beginning to care about Melanie more than he had intended. That night, as he lay in the guest room, Richard stared at the ceiling, his thoughts swirling. He had been so sure that this marriage would be nothing more than a business transaction, but something about Melanie was making him rethink everything. He had always believed that emotions and relationships were just distractions, that love was something for people who had the time and energy for it. But now, with her image still fresh in his mind, he wasn't so sure anymore. Meanwhile, Melanie lay awake in her own room, also thinking about the day's events. She had been raised to view marriage as a business transaction, something to secure her future and the future of her family. But Richard, he was different. There was something about the way he looked at her, something that made her feel like she was more than just a business deal to him. She had expected to go through the motions of this marriage, just as she had done with so many other aspects of her life. But with Richard, things felt different. She had no idea how she could feel this way about a man she had only just met, but she couldn't deny the connection between them. The next few days passed in a blur. They attended events together, posed for photos, and interacted in front of the media. But behind closed doors, things were less predictable. There were moments when their conversations felt more natural, more real, like they were starting to actually get to know each other. Richard found himself looking forward to their time together, something he never expected to happen. Melanie, too, found herself growing more comfortable around him. She had always been a private person, but Richard's quiet strength made her feel safe. As they spent more time together, Richard's doubts began to fade. Maybe this wasn't just a business deal. Maybe he had been wrong about everything he thought he knew about relationships. Maybe this could be something more. It was during one of these quiet moments, as they sat together in the garden after a long day, that Richard finally spoke up. "Melanie," he said softly, "I have to admit I'm starting to think this might not be what I expected." Melanie turned to him, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard paused, searching for the right words. "I thought this would be just a business arrangement. No feelings, no complications." But now, he looked into her eyes, his voice trailing off. Melanie felt her pulse quicken. Was this it? Was he finally admitting that there was something more between them? She didn't know if she was ready to hear it, but a part of her hoped he was about to say what she had been feeling all along. "But now?" she pressed gently. Richard took a deep breath, then smiled. "But now, I'm not so sure. I think I might be starting to care about you." Melanie's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she had heard him right, but in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that for the first time, she wasn't alone in this. And maybe, just maybe, this marriage wouldn't be just another business deal after all. I know you're waiting to find out what happens next, so let's dive right into the story. After Richard's admission, the silence between him and Melanie hung in the air for a moment, neither of them quite sure what to say next. They had spent the last few days pretending, fulfilling their roles in this contract marriage. But something had shifted. Richard was starting to feel things he hadn't expected, and Melanie was beginning to question the foundation of the arrangement they had set up. She wasn't sure what she wanted, but she knew that the connection between them was growing stronger with each passing day. Melanie took a deep breath, looking at Richard with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "You're starting to care about me?" she asked, her voice soft. Richard nodded slowly, his gaze not leaving hers. "I never thought I would, but—" He paused, searching for the right words. "But you've made me question everything. I don't know if it's just this arrangement anymore. I think I might actually want this." Melanie's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing. She had known, deep down, that this could happen. She had felt it too. There was something about Richard that drew her in. Something more than just his wealth or the power he held. There was a gentleness in him, something hidden beneath the surface, something real. But she had been so focused on the practical side of this marriage, on making it work as a business deal, that she hadn't allowed herself to believe it could be anything else. "Are you saying," Melanie began, her voice trembling slightly, "that you want this marriage to be real?" Richard looked at her, his expression serious. "I don't know what this is yet, but I do know that I want to find out. I'm not ready to walk away, not when it feels like this." There was a pause, and then Melanie let out a small laugh, one that was part relief, part disbelief. "I never thought I'd hear you say that," she said softly. "I thought this was all just a contract for you, something to get through. But now, you're saying you want more." Richard gave a small, nervous smile, his usual confident demeanor slipping for just a moment. "I didn't expect this either, but I can't ignore it anymore. I want to see where this goes. I think we owe it to ourselves to at least try." Melanie's heart felt like it was about to explode in her chest. She had spent so long hiding behind the walls she had built around herself, trying to keep her emotions in check, but now Richard was tearing them down. She wasn't sure if she was ready to fully embrace what this could be, but part of her was terrified of losing him. "I'm not sure what I want," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I know what this started as, and I don't want to get my hopes up, but—" She paused, glancing down at her hands before looking back up at him. "But I think I might want this too." Richard's expression softened, and for the first time since they met, he felt like he was seeing her clearly. Not just the woman in front of him, the businesswoman, but the person who had somehow wormed her way into his heart without him even realizing it. "We'll take it slow," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "No pressure. We can just be two people trying to figure this out." Melanie nodded, feeling a rush of relief flood through her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be another failed arrangement. Maybe they could build something real. The days that followed felt different, lighter. They still had public events to attend, still had to maintain their facade for the world, but behind closed doors, things were shifting. Richard and Melanie found themselves laughing together more, sharing stories, talking about things they'd never thought to discuss before. It was strange, almost surreal, how quickly they had gone from strangers to something more. Richard, who had always been so guarded, found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't expected. He shared memories from his childhood, moments of vulnerability he had buried deep inside. Melanie, too, found herself letting her guard down. She had spent so much of her life protecting her emotions, but with Richard, she felt safe enough to let him see the real her. As the weeks passed, Richard realized that what started as a business deal was becoming something much deeper. He couldn't deny it anymore. He was falling for Melanie. He had tried to fight it at first, thinking it was just a temporary attraction, something that would fade. But it hadn't. In fact, it had only grown stronger. And what scared him most was that he didn't want it to stop. But even as his feelings for her grew, he knew there was still a part of him that was holding back, afraid to fully let go. What if he was wrong? What if this was all just a fantasy? He couldn't afford to lose everything, especially not to someone who was still technically his business partner's daughter. As for Melanie, she was starting to feel the same way. She couldn't ignore the connection they shared, the way Richard made her feel like she mattered, like she was more than just a pawn in some business arrangement. But she too was afraid. She had already been hurt once before, and opening up to Richard meant risking everything. Yet, as they sat together one evening, the weight of the world felt lighter. There was something unspoken between them, a promise that they weren't alone anymore. Maybe this was the beginning of something they had both been waiting for, and maybe, just maybe, this marriage could be the start of something real. I know you're eager to find out what happens next, so let's keep going with the story. As the days passed, Richard and Melanie began to build a rhythm together, a comfortable routine that felt less like an arrangement and more like something they were both beginning to care about. They still had their moments of doubt, of course, moments where they wondered if this was all too good to be true, but there was something undeniable between them. Richard found himself thinking about her more and more, something he never thought would happen in a million years. He had always been so focused on his career, his empire, but now he was finding that his thoughts would often wander to Melanie, how she smiled, the way her laugh filled a room, the way she could make him feel like he wasn't just a businessman, but a person. It was foreign to him, this feeling of wanting someone so badly without any clear reason why. And it terrified him. He had built walls around himself for so long, walls that kept everyone out, especially when it came to his emotions. But Melanie had somehow broken through those walls, and he wasn't sure what to do about it. Melanie, too, was struggling with her emotions. She had always been the one in control, the one who kept things together, who made everything seem effortless. But with Richard, she felt like she was losing that control, and she didn't know how to handle it. She found herself looking forward to the moments they spent together, those quiet evenings when it was just the two of them, talking about everything and nothing. It was strange how easily she had let down her guard around him, but she couldn't ignore the fact that he made her feel seen, truly seen, in a way she had never felt before. But just as things were beginning to feel more comfortable, more real, something unexpected happened. Richard's business partner, the one who had set up this whole arrangement in the first place, called him one afternoon to remind him of the terms of the deal. "Richard, remember what this is about," his partner said over the phone. "You can't let your emotions get in the way of this. It's a business transaction, not a love story." Richard felt a wave of frustration wash over him as he listened. He had known from the start that this was supposed to be just a deal, but hearing those words again made it feel like everything they had built was being torn down in an instant. He had worked so hard to separate his personal life from his business life, but now he was starting to realize that he couldn't do it. Not with Melanie. He couldn't just push her aside like a business transaction. But the pressure from his partner was real, and it made him question everything he had been feeling. That evening, as they sat together in the living room, Richard's mind was miles away. Melanie could see it in his eyes. She had learned to read him in the short time they had spent together, and she knew something was bothering him. "Richard," she asked softly, reaching out to touch his hand. He snapped out of his thoughts and looked at her, trying to mask the worry on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked again, her voice gentle. Richard hesitated, then let out a long sigh. "I got a call today," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It was from my business partner. He reminded me of what this marriage is really about." He paused, his gaze falling to the floor. "He said I can't let my feelings get in the way of this, that it's just a business deal, not a love story." Melanie's heart sank. She had known this was coming, that sooner or later, the business side of their marriage would rear its ugly head. But hearing Richard say it out loud made it feel so real, so final. She had hoped, foolishly maybe, that this would turn into something more. She had wanted it to be more. "I didn't know it would be this hard," Richard continued, his voice filled with frustration. "I thought I could keep it separate, but I can't. I'm starting to care about you, Melanie. And it's not just because of the deal, it's because I like being with you." Melanie felt a surge of hope. There it was again, that same feeling that had been building between them. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a business arrangement after all. But she couldn't shake the doubt that lingered in the back of her mind. "What does this mean for us?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Richard looked up at her, his expression conflicted. "I don't know," he admitted. "I wish I had an answer, but I can't deny that something is changing. I just don't know if I'm ready to let go of everything I've worked for." Melanie nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She understood. She had her own fears, her own doubts. She had always kept her emotions guarded, never allowing herself to believe in something that might end in disappointment. But with Richard, she was starting to see that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than business deals and contracts. The silence between them stretched on, neither of them knowing how to move forward. Richard's heart was torn between his responsibilities and the feelings he had developed for Melanie, and Melanie's mind was filled with uncertainty about what would happen if they let their guard down too much. But in that moment, they both knew one thing for certain: they were no longer just playing roles in a business deal. Something real was happening, and neither of them could ignore it. I know you're waiting to find out what happens next, so let's continue. After Richard's confession, the tension between him and Melanie seemed to settle into something heavier, something more complicated. They had both been trying to ignore the emotions they were starting to feel for each other, but the truth was undeniable. Richard had admitted it to her, and Melanie had heard the sincerity in his voice, but there was still a wall between them. They were both afraid. Melanie, who had always relied on logic and control, wasn't used to letting her heart take the lead. She had grown up in a world of business and strategy, where emotions were a luxury she couldn't afford. And now, here she was, falling for a man who was supposed to be just another part of the deal. She wasn't sure if she was ready to fully let go of the walls she had built around her heart. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. She had never felt this way before. As for Richard, he was just as conflicted. He had always kept his emotions at arm's length, focusing on his work, his empire. But now that he was starting to care for Melanie, he wasn't sure how to handle it. He had promised himself that he wouldn't let anyone get too close, that he wouldn't let his emotions interfere with his business. But with Melanie, everything was different. He had never expected to feel so strongly about her, and now that he did, he wasn't sure what to do with it. The uncertainty between them lingered, but so did the undeniable chemistry. Days went by, and they continued their routine of attending public events, making appearances as a married couple. But it was clear that the lines between business and personal were becoming more blurred. They started to spend more time together outside of their official duties, having long conversations about everything and nothing, laughing over dinner, and enjoying each other's company. It wasn't love yet, but it was something close to it. It was real, and it was growing. Then, one evening, Richard invited Melanie to a charity gala. It was one of those high-profile events where everyone was expected to dress in their best, pretend to be happy, and rub elbows with the city's elite. Melanie had been to these events countless times, but this time it felt different. She was walking into the event with Richard, and for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged there with him. As they entered the grand hall, people turned to look, whispering to each other about the newlyweds. Richard had been known in the business world, but this was the first time Melanie had truly seen what his world looked like. It was glamorous, cold, and filled with power plays and subtle manipulations. But what struck her the most was the way Richard moved through the crowd. He was confident, yes, but there was something else in his eyes, a vulnerability that only she seemed to notice. The evening went on with the usual fanfare. They were introduced to high-profile figures, posed for photos, and exchanged pleasantries. But throughout the night, Melanie couldn't shake the feeling that Richard was no longer the same man he had been when they first met. She could see it in the way he looked at her, the way his hand found hers under the table when they sat together. It was subtle, but it was there, and it made her heart race every time. At one point during the gala, Richard excused himself to speak with a colleague, leaving Melanie alone for a few minutes. She stood by the window, gazing out at the city lights, when a voice interrupted her thoughts. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She turned around to find a woman standing behind her, smiling warmly. "It is," Melanie replied, smiling back. The woman introduced herself as Eleanor, a longtime friend of Richard's. They exchanged pleasantries, and the conversation quickly turned to the topic of the wedding. Eleanor, ever the socialite, couldn't help but ask, "So, how are things going with Richard?" "I must admit, it was a bit of a surprise when he married so suddenly." Melanie felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't know how to answer. It had been a surprise to her too. But as she looked back at Richard across the room, she realized that it wasn't just a surprise, it was something more. "It's going well," Melanie said, her voice steady. "I think we're both adjusting." Eleanor smiled knowingly, as if she could see right through her. "I'm glad to hear that. Richard's a good man. He's just always been so focused on work. It's good to see him finding someone he can rely on." Melanie couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. She wasn't sure if Eleanor was implying that she was just another part of Richard's business, or if she was truly seeing the connection that was starting to form between them. But before she could say anything else, Richard returned to her side, his presence pulling her out of her thoughts. "You okay?" he asked softly, his eyes searching hers. Melanie nodded, giving him a small smile. "I'm fine," she said. "Just thinking about everything." Richard smiled back, but there was something in his eyes that told her he understood exactly what she was feeling. As the night went on, Melanie couldn't help but feel a growing sense of hope. Despite the doubts and fears, there was something between them that felt real. It was raw and unspoken, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Not just as a business arrangement, but as something more. I know you are eager to see how this story unfolds, so let's continue. After the gala, things began to shift between Richard and Melanie in a way they both hadn't anticipated. The energy between them was different now, lighter, more genuine. What had started as a business arrangement was slowly transforming into something neither of them could deny. They spent more time together, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted to. It wasn't love yet, but it was something real. And for the first time, it felt like there was no going back. Melanie couldn't help but notice the small gestures, how Richard would gently touch her arm when they were seated next to each other, how his eyes lingered on her a little longer than they should. She could feel the change in him too. The man who had once been so distant, so focused on his business, was now more present with her, more open. He was showing sides of himself she had never expected to see. And in turn, she felt herself letting go of the walls she had spent years building around her heart. Yet, despite the closeness that was growing between them, there was still that nagging doubt. Was this real? Or were they simply caught up in the moment, swept away by the circumstances? Melanie couldn't shake the question from her mind. She had been so cautious all her life, so careful not to get too emotionally involved. But Richard was making her feel things she wasn't sure she was ready to feel. One afternoon, a few weeks after the gala, Richard invited Melanie to spend the day with him at his family's estate. The invitation was casual, just a quiet afternoon to talk, no business, no social obligations. It was just the two of them, in the sprawling gardens, with the sun shining down and a gentle breeze in the air. It was a simple day, but somehow, it felt like it meant more than any extravagant event they had attended. As they walked through the garden, Richard took her hand in his, and for the first time, it felt natural. No cameras, no public eyes, just two people finding comfort in each other's presence. "I've never really stopped to appreciate moments like this," Richard said softly, glancing at her. "I've been so caught up in work, in building my empire, that I forgot what it feels like to just be." Melanie squeezed his hand, a quiet understanding passing between them. "I think we both have," she replied. They walked in silence for a while, simply enjoying the peaceful surroundings. But as they reached the edge of the garden, Richard stopped and turned to her. "Melanie," he said, his voice serious, "I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped a beat. She had heard that tone before, the one that indicated something important was coming. She met his eyes, her own full of curiosity and a little anxiety. "What is it?" she asked. Richard took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm not sure how to say this, but I've been thinking a lot about us, about this whole situation. And the truth is, I've started to fall for you." The words hung in the air, heavy and sincere. Melanie's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected it, felt it in the way he looked at her, the way he acted around her. But hearing him say it out loud was a different thing entirely. "I didn't expect this," he continued, his voice soft but firm. "I came into this marriage thinking it would be a business deal, nothing more. But now, I can't ignore what I feel. And I don't want to pretend that this isn't something important to me anymore." Melanie stood frozen for a moment, trying to process his words. She had heard him, she knew what he was saying, but she wasn't sure how to respond. She had never allowed herself to let go of control, never let herself be vulnerable with anyone. But with Richard, it was different. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been so careful, trying not to fall into this, trying not to let my feelings get in the way. But now," she looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "But now, I think I feel the same way." Richard's eyes softened, and he stepped closer to her. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "You're scared," he said, more of a statement than a question. She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I've been hurt before, Richard," she said quietly. "And I don't know if I can let myself fall for you, not when I'm not sure what's going to happen next." He smiled, a reassuring smile that reached his eyes. "We'll take it slow," he said. "No pressure. Just let me be here with you. Let me show you that this is real." Melanie felt a weight lift off her shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to trust him. As they stood there, in the middle of the garden, hand in hand, they both knew that something had shifted. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. This was something real, something they both wanted. And they were ready to take the next step, together. I know you've been waiting to find out what happens next, so let's continue. After their heartfelt conversation in the garden, Richard and Melanie spent the next few days trying to process everything that had changed between them. What had started as a contract, a business arrangement between two people who had no intentions of falling in love, was slowly becoming something much more significant. They had admitted their feelings to each other, but neither of them knew what the next step was. They had always kept their emotions in check, both of them guarded, unwilling to take risks. But now, the walls they had carefully built around themselves were beginning to crack. It wasn't an easy transition. Melanie still had moments of doubt, moments where she questioned whether she could fully let go of the control she had always had over her life. She had worked so hard to keep her personal life separate from her business, and now she was starting to wonder if she could truly merge the two. What if this wasn't real? What if, after all the emotions and confessions, everything would fall apart? Richard, too, struggled with the uncertainty of their situation. He had always been a man of logic, driven by success and wealth, but with Melanie, things were different. He couldn't explain it, and he didn't want to fight it anymore. He wanted to see where this could go, but there was still that lingering fear. What if they were just a temporary solution to a much deeper issue? What if, in the end, this was all a mistake? Their fear and doubt didn't stop them from spending more time together. They started to fall into a natural rhythm, learning more about each other with every conversation. They shared their hopes, their fears, their dreams, and with every moment, they became closer. Richard began to understand the woman behind the business facade. She was driven, yes, but there was so much more to her warmth, her passion for art, her love for animals, and the way she cared for everyone around her, even when she was struggling herself. And Melanie, for the first time, began to see beyond Richard's empire, beyond the walls he had built around himself. She saw the man who was kind, thoughtful, and someone who was willing to take risks for the people he cared about. But despite all of this, the pressure of their situation never fully disappeared. Richard's business partner, the one who had arranged the marriage, was still constantly in the background, pushing for things to move forward, for the deal to be finalized. The weight of that expectation hung over them both. Melanie began to feel like she was losing control of her own life. She was no longer just part of a business arrangement. She was falling for Richard, and she wasn't sure if he felt the same way. She wanted more from him, but she didn't want to seem desperate, didn't want to push him into something he wasn't ready for. Richard, on the other hand, felt the same pressure. He had always prided himself on being in control, on making decisions that would benefit him in the long run. But now, with Melanie in his life, he wasn't sure what was best for him anymore. He didn't want to lose her, but he didn't know how to balance his personal life with the expectations of his business world. And then came the moment that changed everything. Richard's partner called again, this time demanding that they finalize the details of their partnership and move forward with their plans. The conversation was brief, cold, and direct. Richard was left with the decision of whether to give in to the pressure or to take a stand. That evening, after the call ended, he sat in the living room, staring out the window, his mind racing. Melanie walked into the room, sensing something was off. She stood quietly for a moment, unsure of what to say, but then spoke softly. "Richard, what's wrong?" He turned to her, his face tense. "It's just, everything is moving too fast. I don't know what's real anymore. My partner wants us to finalize everything this marriage, the deal, and I'm not sure if it's what I want. It's what I've always done, always been focused on, but now, with you, I don't know." Melanie took a step closer, her heart aching for him. She reached out and gently took his hand. "Richard," she said softly, "I know what we've been through hasn't been easy. We've both had our doubts, our fears. But I'm not asking you to give up everything for me. I just want to be with you, for us to figure this out together. I want to know that we're making this decision because it's what we both want, not because we're being pushed into it." Richard looked at her, his heart heavy with emotion. He had spent so long building his life around success, around the expectations of others, that he had forgotten what it felt like to live for himself. And now, standing in front of Melanie, he realized that he didn't want to lose her. He didn't want to lose the chance at something real. "I'm scared, Melanie," he confessed. "I don't know what the future holds, But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to let this go. Melanie smiled, her heart swelling with relief. Then let's take it one step at a time, she said, squeezing his hand. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just need to trust each other. Richard nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he knew he was ready to face it with Melanie by his side. I know you've been following this journey with anticipation, so let's continue. After their heartfelt conversation, Richard and Melanie decided to take a leap of faith, choosing to trust each other and explore the real connection that was growing between them. Despite the lingering pressure from Richard's business partner and the weight of their original agreement, they both agreed to slow down and focus on their relationship, taking it one day at a time. They spent the next few weeks living in this new reality, balancing public appearances and business responsibilities with private moments of genuine connection. But as the days went on, the challenges of their situation began to resurface. Richard's partner, the one who had orchestrated their marriage from the start, began pushing harder for them to finalize the deal, reminding Richard that their arrangement was always supposed to be about business. The tension in Richard's chest grew with each call, each reminder that the stakes were higher than ever. He had promised Melanie that he wouldn't let this marriage be reduced to a contract, but now he wasn't sure how to keep that promise. Melanie, too, felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her. She had always been so cautious, so calculated when it came to her emotions, but now, with Richard, she was starting to feel something deeper, something that terrified her. What if everything they had built was just a fantasy? What if in the end they were just playing roles in a story that would end in disappointment? The doubt gnawed at her. But then something unexpected happened. One evening, Richard invited her to a dinner at one of the city's most prestigious restaurants. It was a private event, a gathering of influential people, where their presence was meant to seal the deal. Melanie knew this was important, that Richard's reputation and the future of his business were at stake. But when she stepped into the room, with Richard by her side, she couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence. This wasn't just a business dinner anymore. This was a statement that she and Richard were no longer just playing roles, but were truly committed to each other. The night went by in a blur of conversations, handshakes, and polite smiles. But through it all, Richard stayed close to her, his hand occasionally brushing against hers, his eyes never far from hers. For the first time in a long time, Richard felt at ease. Yes, there was still pressure from his business world, but in Melanie's presence, he felt something that had been missing for so long, a sense of calm, of real connection. When the event came to an end, Richard and Melanie found themselves alone in the parking lot, walking toward the car. Richard took a deep breath, turning to Melanie. I know this isn't easy, he said, his voice low, but I want you to know that I'm not giving up on us. I don't care what happens with the deal or what anyone else thinks. I'm with you, Melanie. I've been with you this whole time, and I'm not going anywhere. Melanie looked at him, her heart pounding. She had always been the one to keep control, to keep her emotions in check, but now, in that moment, she felt herself letting go. She had spent so long wondering if she could trust him, if she could trust herself. But with those words, everything changed. I'm with you too, Richard, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion rising inside her. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Richard smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Then let's not look back, he said softly. No matter what happens, let's move forward together, as a team. Melanie nodded, her heart swelling with hope. In that moment, she knew that they could make it work. They had come so far, fought through their doubts, their fears, and the pressure from the outside world. And now, they were finally ready to face whatever came next, together. The days that followed were filled with small, everyday moments that made their bond stronger. They still had to navigate the complexities of their arrangement, but now, it felt different. Now, they were in it together. They had faced the uncertainty and the pressure, and instead of falling apart, they had grown closer. Their love, though still new and fragile, was becoming something real. As they walked hand in hand, facing the future with a new sense of purpose, Richard realized that he had never felt more alive, more complete. And for Melanie, she had finally found the one thing she had always been searching for, someone who truly saw her, someone who made her feel like she wasn't just a business partner, but a person, worthy of love and happiness. Together, they had rewritten their story, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like they had everything they needed to build a future together. I know you've been following this journey with anticipation, so let's see how it ends. After Richard and Melanie made their commitment to each other, their lives began to shift in ways they hadn't expected. The weight of their original business arrangement still loomed over them, but now it felt like something they could face together. They were no longer just playing the roles they were assigned in the deal. They were starting to build something real. Despite the growing pressure from Richard's business partner, who was still eager to close the deal and finalize everything, both Richard and Melanie were determined not to let it consume them. They knew the stakes, but they also knew they had found something more valuable than any business arrangement each other. As the days passed, Richard and Melanie's connection deepened. They spent more time together, getting to know each other in ways they never had before. They laughed together, shared their hopes and dreams, and supported each other through the challenges that came with living a life so closely tied to the business world. Melanie, who had always been independent and cautious with her emotions, started to realize that she wasn't afraid anymore. She was learning to trust Richard, to open her heart to the possibility of something real, even though it scared her. And Richard, who had built his empire by keeping his emotions locked away, found himself letting go of the control he had always relied on. With Melanie by his side, he realized that success and power didn't mean anything if you didn't have someone to share it with. Then, one day, everything changed. Richard's partner called him again, this time with a final push. "It's time to wrap things up," his partner said, his tone urgent. "The deal is waiting, and we need to finalize this marriage to complete everything." Richard felt a tightness in his chest as he listened to the words, but this time, he didn't feel the usual anxiety. Instead, he felt a deep sense of clarity. He had been so focused on keeping his business life separate from his personal life that he had almost forgotten what mattered most, what he wanted. He wasn't going to let this deal define his life anymore. He wasn't going to let his partner's demands dictate his happiness. That evening, Richard sat down with Melanie in their living room, the two of them alone in the quiet comfort of their home. He looked at her, feeling more certain of his decision than he ever had before. "Melanie," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I've been thinking about everything, about this deal, about us, and I've realized something. I don't want to keep living like this. I don't want to keep living for someone else's expectations. I want to live for us. I want to build a life with you, not just close a business deal." Melanie's heart skipped a beat as she listened to him, her eyes filled with surprise and something else, hope. She had always feared this moment, wondering if Richard would ever truly choose her over his business. But now, standing before her, he was making that choice. "Richard, are you sure?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is a huge decision. What about the business? What about everything we've worked for?" Richard smiled, a smile that reached his eyes and softened his features. "We'll figure it out," he said, his tone calm and full of conviction. "What we have, what we've built together, it's more important than any deal. I don't need to be in control of everything anymore. I just need you." Melanie felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had never expected to hear him say those words, to see him so open, so vulnerable. In that moment, all her fears melted away. She took his hand in hers, squeezing it gently. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said, her voice steady now. "Let's do this. Let's build something real, together." The decision was made. Richard called his partner the next day, explaining that he was backing out of the deal, that he was choosing his life, his marriage, over the business arrangement. There was tension on the other end of the line, but Richard stood firm in his decision. As the call ended, he turned to Melanie, a sense of relief washing over him. He had made the right choice. The days that followed were filled with new possibilities. Richard and Melanie began to plan their future together, building a life that was entirely their own. They started making decisions that weren't about contracts or business, but about what truly mattered each other. They traveled, spent time with family, and found new ways to support each other's dreams. It wasn't always easy, but it was real. And in the end, that was enough. Their love, once born out of an arrangement, had transformed into something far deeper and more meaningful. And as they stood together, looking ahead to the future, they knew one thing for certain: they had built something that was truly theirs, something that would last.